Welcome to this video about the Care Act duties on outcomes, needs and care and support. Please note that we have other videos on this topic on the Sky website alongside other resources and a handout with key messages and reflective questions to embed the learning. Today we will explore what are outcomes in the context of the Care Act. In a previous video, we looked at what we meant in relation, or what we mean in relation to needs. So we explored the difference between presenting needs, assessed needs, and eligible needs. So when we are working under the Care Act, outcomes are very strongly featured. Everything is an outcome. And so we think it's important to just clarify what we mean by outcomes in relation to our roles and responsibilities under the Care Act. So an outcome is the end result. So as a result of an intervention or a conversation or a process, what is going to be, what's going to have been achieved. So if we think about an assessment of need for care and support, the outcome of that is that we will have had or gained an appropriate and proportionate understanding of the individual circumstances and the things that they are wanting to achieve and the difficulties that they are facing in relation to that. So Carmen, when we are thinking about outcomes, is there anything that you can think about in terms of what an outcome means?
Yes, and I think the first type is, as you said, which is the outcome of an intervention or a process. There is a second type, not necessarily in order, okay, but there's another type of outcome that is very well featured in the Care Act, which is what is called personal or desired outcomes. And these are the things that the individual wish to achieve. And the phrasing in the Care Act guidance for understanding or exploring personal or desired outcomes is, what does good look like for you? Yeah, so it's basically the wishful thinking of the individual, the where would they like to be, the should they not have the needs they have, what their life will be about. Yeah, there is another type of outcomes in the Care Act, which are eligibility or specified outcomes, and they call both things depending where you look at. In the regulations, they call specified outcomes, but in the guidance, sometimes they refer as eligibility outcomes. These are the outcomes that don't have a place in the assessment. They're not part of the assessment at all. The assessment should be about personal and desired outcomes. The eligibility or specified outcomes are those outcomes that we use to determine eligibility in the second criteria or second condition, and that the law tells us to say, is the adult or the carer able or unable to achieve one of these. Yeah, so the only time we should be using the eligibility or specified outcomes is when determining eligibility, but on the second condition criteria. There is an interesting thing in relation to personal and desired outcomes, and is, we mentioned on the video about needs how sometimes people phrase as needs services or products or activities or tasks, yeah, and they do so with outcomes too, yeah. So they may say, I want to go to I don't know, to this type of specific activity twice a week, yeah. Well, they phrase that as an outcome, yeah, and in a way it is an end result of the could be an end result, but as social care practitioners, that is a product, a service, or an activity. Yeah. So we need to explore the different elements of that outcome for the individual. So what it is in doing an activity that makes sense for the individual, that actually is appealing for them. Is this about being outdoors? Is it about meeting new people? Is it about sharing an interest with other people? Is it new people or existing people, so people they already know? Is it about frequency? Is it for some people doing something every week may be overwhelming, for other people doing every month is not enough? So we need to really unpick all the elements of that outcome, yeah? Because as we're gonna see later, that is gonna help us when we link in outcomes with needs to ensure that we take into account as many elements as possible, yeah? And on this, Paula, how do you see, the relationship between outcomes and needs? What are the differences between those that we explore in another video, but just for our listeners on this one?
Yeah, I think we use the terms outcomes, wishes, and aspirations interchangeably, and that's completely, that's absolutely fine. But we do need to remember as social care practitioners that there is a distinct definition and way in which we should be thinking about outcomes when we're working with individuals. What we also need to be mindful of as well is that not only for ourselves and our own practice, but also for purposes of explaining to individuals that we're working with what the difference between a need is under the Care Act and what an outcome is under the Care Act. So, for example, somebody may say that they need something, but actually, when we look at it from the eyes of a social care practitioner, it's not a need, it's an outcome that they would like to achieve, it's a wish, it's an aspiration. Okay, so we need to be really clear through that conversation, through any recording around outcomes, that we're specifying whether or not, it is an outcome or if it's a wish or an aspiration. Carmen, can you think of any examples to help just, put that message across in a more practical example?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And the thing is, the reason why we need to be really clear what is an outcome and what is a need is because our legal duties towards each of them is different as social care practitioners. Yeah. So in this assessment process, we need to capture all the needs around the 9 well-being areas, and we need to capture all the outcomes around the 9 well-being areas. But when we determine eligibility, we need to distinguish one thing from the other. And then once we determine eligibility, we have the legal duty to meet eligible needs, having regard to personal outcomes. We don't have the legal duty to meet personal outcomes. So if in the assessment we haven't made really clear what is a need and what is an outcome, when we come into after determination of eligibility, we're not going to be clear what we need to meet and what we having to have regard to. Yeah, and you said, and it's correct, that we need to put our social care practitioner hat to do that, and it will be in discussion with the individual, and we don't necessarily have to agree. Okay, what is important in the assessment is that we record what is the individual's point of view and what is our point of view based on the entirety of the assessment process. Yeah, so it's not our personal opinion, obviously, it's just a professional judgment interaction. And one example that I think is quite illustrative to differentiate the eligible needs from the personal outcomes is and how to work with that in a support plan stage or farther down the line after determination of eligibility is, in a lot of occasions, pre-Care Act particularly, but even with Care Act, if an individual is deemed to have needs in relation to maintaining relationships, what we used to call social isolation, historically, the way to deal with that was to suggest a day center for the individual. But historically, we didn't really inquire about personal outcomes. What means it was a lot of people who we sent to a day center, and sometimes they end up even more isolated than they were before, because for that a specific individual being surrounded by people who are interacting make them feel even more socially isolated. And it may be that, the type of things that went on in the day center are not the type of things that, will support them in not being socially isolated. So it is really important that we ask the personal outcomes. And as we said before, that we actually unpick the elements of that. So somebody may say, well, I would like to go gardening in a garden garden center once a week, for example, yeah, with a group of people. And that could be, they phrase it that way. Obviously, that's not exactly an outcome. There is an outcome there, but it's not exactly an outcome. So we need to unpick what is going on there. Okay, do they like gardening, or do they like doing something with a group of people? Do they like doing something on the outdoors? Is this sharing a common interest with a group of people? It is about meeting new people who has a common interest with them. So all those things have to be unpicked. And then if the person is deemed to have an eligible need in relation to that, yeah, what the personal outcome is going to give us is a direction of travel, yeah, is the where we're looking at. So the personal outcome may be, in this occasion, doing a set activity with a new group of people and continue exercising that activity or task for a period of time with whatever regularity, with some regularity, yeah? So that will be more an outcome than as phrased before. Now, we may not be able to provide that, yeah, as a local authority, because our duty, remember, is to meet eligible needs, not to achieve eligible to achieve personal outcomes. And the eligible need must be on the path towards the personal outcome, but it may be closer to the individual. So it may be that all we can support is have a volunteer that comes to the individual's house and do some gardening with them in their own garden. Yeah, and maybe that's all we can support, but still we may be meeting the eligible needs on walking towards the personal outcome, but not achieving it. So we have had regard for it. So this is what is important. That's why it's important to unpick all the elements of the personal outcome and differentiate that the duties to meet eligible needs having regard to personal outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also important that when we're working with individuals to kind of formulate an outcome, that we don't put the service in the outcome. So in your example, the garden centre is an activity. So, we wanted to, the person wanted to garden at the garden centre. If we're adding garden centre into the outcome, it's taken us down a particular path. Whereas if it was, I just want to garden, then as you said, a volunteer could come and support that individual to, do that gardening and therefore meet that need or that, desired outcome.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So once again, what is really important here is that we don't use the word outcome without defining what type of outcome we're talking about. Yeah. So we can't just say outcomes. We need to specify whether we're talking about personal or desired outcomes, or whether we're talking about eligibility or specified outcomes, because the personal and desired outcomes are a very different thing from the eligibility of specified outcomes.
Absolutely. And that is, just reiterating the point that we need to be clear as to what is a need and what is an outcome for our roles and responsibilities. Fantastic. Thank you. So thank you very much for watching this short video. Please do remember that we have other resources in relation to our legal duties on our website. So please do go and have a look.